from 16 to 25 basically was, just full throttle, like heroin addiction, pill addiction. I was really into psychedelics as well because when I was 15, I got into Buddhism. I took mushrooms at 15. 2017, I ended up homeless. And at that point, I'd kind of lost a lot of hope. Like I kind of became numb to my life. I always had this sense in me, deep in me, no matter how hopeless I felt, there was something always there. And I know now it's like the word, God speaks a word over us. That's what that was. It was that seed of his word in my life for over a year, I'm calling out to God, walking to go get drugs, begging him. Like I thought, did people tell me you're real? Why aren't you showing up for me? Why aren't, like, what do I got to do to get in touch with you? And I remember I told God, I said, you know what? I don't know how real you are. I don't know how much you care about me, but I said, I just want to be a good boy. I'm not asking you to do nothing for me. There is nothing more sobering than when the entire universe and God and everything lets you know you're just a piece of dust. And, what was crazy is I actually started to have these encounters with God that reminded me of psychedelics. Like, there was this joy, this laughter, this type of just richness of life that would flood through me. And then next thing I knew, I'm having those types of experiences through prayer, except it was clean. It was like, there's no come down with this. There's no anxiety. It was like, man, this is pure life. Like I felt like I was like hooked up to, like Captain America's machine or something, just like getting flooded with life.
Hey there, Cylinder Radio listeners. A few years ago, the documentary The Social Dilemma laid out how social media is very dangerous and bad for American society. But if you want to use social media to make yourself better, you can check out my free download, The Social Solution, on cylinderradio.com/social solution.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I am high school teacher Will Roosh. I teach social studies in Los Angeles and try to bring viewpoint diversity to the kind of mainstream social media podcasting space. And my guest today has really lived a very diverse life. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from his story. His name is Joshua Zatkoff. He is kind of hard to box in. I guess to be a former drug addict and a person who lived a kind of wild life, who has changed that and become a Christian evangelist who lives kind of the straight and narrow path. And I think that that's something, when you live two very, very different lives, something that we can kind of learn about what made that change. And then also what was kind of the big lessons, because so much that I do in the classroom is trying to teach my students about learn it the easy way so you don't have to learn it the hard way. And unfortunately, a lot of times you have to learn it the hard way to kind of get it. So Joshua, thank you so much. I saw you on a YouTube video. Someone sent it to me. And then also I saw you on the Michael Knowles podcast. And I was a little frustrated with sometimes the way that he runs his podcast. So I decided to reach out to you, and I really appreciate you giving me your time to come on here and talk. Nice to meet you, man.
Yeah. I appreciate you, Will. Thanks for having me on here.
One of the things that kind of prompted this is I just got back from the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver. And it was a really interesting thing. I've been very interested in the psychedelic plant medicines and things like that, and the way that they're being used in a very secular kind of social science and hard science way to understand how the brain works and things like that. And one of the ways that you get labeled in your YouTube videos is that you were a psychedelic user, and that helped you have certain experiences and stuff like that. Your testimony, I guess you could say, is like kind of like your whole story is out there on the internet, and people can find that. But can you maybe summarize that for us a little bit? Just give us a little bit of your background, a little bit about the shortened version, the Cliff Notes, Spark Notes version, about how you kind of got through that whole process.
Yeah, of course. If I start at the beginning of my testimony really starts with, obviously at childhood, just very briefly, I was raised and baptized Russian Orthodox, but I do want to, strain that it wasn't pressed on me. I was far from indoctrinated. We went to church, and it was like the second we left church, God wasn't talked about. So it really wasn't like I was raised with it, or, you know what I mean? So I didn't even really know anything about it. I never read the Bible. It wasn't there. And so by the time I was like 10 or 11, 12, whatever time my parents let me stay home alone, that was the end of it, right? And my mom wasn't really into it. She just kind of did it because my dad wanted to do it. And so that's kind of my religious background. I had a good childhood. Like, I didn't have a broken home. I had both my parents there. Wasn't rich, wasn't, poor. We just, good middle class childhood. Around the age of like 12, I was always like kind of a wild kid as far as just pushing the envelope, like just doing things to always kind of like push my boundaries. You know what I mean? Even as a kid, playing in the neighborhood or whatever with other kids, and just by the time I was like 12, I was dealing with like a type of depression that I didn't really know was a depression. You know what I mean? I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that internally something started to feel like it was missing. When you're a kid, it's like life has that natural glow to it, that natural, this zeal for life, a joy for life that, is innocence. And that started to fade away. I got molested when I was 8 or 9 in Puerto Rico by my cousin. At the time, I never would have pinpointed that. I never would have tied those dots together. Now, looking back, I could see that definitely playing a role. But back then, I definitely didn't see that. I just was like, well, what's going on? I just started to feel, empty. I had a friend, at this point, I was in like 7th grade. I had a friend who told me about like smoking weed with his cousins over Christmas break, and so when he explained it, I'm like, that's it. That's what I need. My ears perked up and I'm like, that's the answer, right? And so I think it was probably a few months later, it was like that summer, I ended up getting him to get me some or whatever. And the first time I smoked, there was actually like, it was funny that the first couple of times I attempted to smoke, something would go wrong. The lighter would break. Like it was, you know what I mean? It was like life was trying to keep me from it seemed like. But the first time I actually successfully smoked and got high, that's what happened. It was like this puzzle piece thing for my whole life. Everything made sense. It was a new reality. And especially I think being, obviously that the first time you have any type of altering to your conscious, or, you know what I mean? Especially being that young, I was, 12, it was very powerful. It was very, you know what I mean? And so from that point on, it just, I don't know, I guess something clicked in my mind from that point on that was like what life was about. Obviously, you look in entertainment, you look in music. It's like everybody, it's like cool to do drugs in the music scene. It's like everybody's favorite artist got high and had a drug problem, you know what I mean? And so when I started to notice that, I was like, that's what life's about. I just want to smoke my weed. I'm a better person. I have peace. I like who I am. So obviously my identity started to really shift into that place. I started to find identity as like, the stoner kid and, that kind of stuff. Fast forward to high school, at that point, I was just really like, I was just experimenting with anything. Like anything I could find, I was open to do. It wasn't like I was pursuing things, but anything that like presented itself, it was like, yeah, I want to try that too. And so as I began to do that, I just got deeper and deeper into it. My sophomore year, actually on Valentine's Day, my freshman year, my parents found out about me smoking weed. And so at that point, they put me like in an outpatient program. So now I'm like this 14-year-old kid with these 18, 17-year-old kids that are doing like heroin and crack, you know what I mean? So it was like you take this person that had like a small weed problem, and now I'm around these people with heroin problems and stuff. And so it kind of just fed my curiosity and kind of backfired. And so I, got sent to a rehab and all this stuff kind of happened. And then fast forward to like 16, I basically came back from a rehab that I was gone for a year, and I was on probation. And so I couldn't get away with like smoking weed the way I used to. And next thing I know, I have a needle in my arm. I'm a heroin addict. By the time I'm 16, I'm shooting heroin. And, obviously that was like a huge shift. Like it took something that seemed innocent and like kind of just, oh, everyone's doing this stuff in high school, to like, now like people are dying, and and like now it's like your life is this, you're a slave now, and you don't know it at first. It seems like it's not going to be that serious, obviously, but so that basically led me to, from 16 to 25, basically was, just full throttle, like heroin addiction, pill addiction. I was really into psychedelics as well, because when I was 15, I got into Buddhism. I took mushrooms at 15, and those two kind of complemented each other. And so I definitely always had this aspect of searching spiritually. I always had, there's a lot of people that you meet in the world of like getting high, where you feel like, man, they don't have a conscience. They don't seem to care. Like, there's a lot of people where you just like, they really don't have any type of like, it's just like this part of them dies and they lose part of their soul and they're just like gone. I never lost that. And if that makes sense, like I always had this sense of purpose. I always had this sense of there's something. I always knew deep down, like I remember I would tell my dad, like, it's gonna be all right, Dad, like, you know what I mean? Like I always had this sense in me, deep in me, no matter how hopeless I felt, there was something always there. And I know now it's like the word, God speaks a word over us. That's what that was. It was that seed of his word in my life. I always knew that something was there. And so I was always searching for that. It was like, man, like I know there's something out there. I know there's a spiritual world, like, I was desperate, but I just couldn't stop getting high. I go through these processes of just basically that lifestyle of going to jail, going to rehabs. And 2017, I end up homeless. I had gotten locked up for a year and a half in 2015. That really rocked me. You know what I mean? I had a kid at that point. I had a kid when I was 18. And so getting locked, she was 3.5 when I left. That really like shook me. You know what I mean? Like it was first time life really hit me in the face of like, yeah, you're screwing up. You know what I mean? Like this isn't a game anymore. All your other friends are, starting to like go do stuff with your life and you're just sinking. It was the first time I started to notice that. The party was over. And so I was locked up for a year and a half. And in there, I started to it was the first time I really wanted to get clean, I think. And so I was serious. And when I got out, I thought that like, I'll just go to the bars. And now, because all my friends, that's kind of what they tell me, it's like, hey bro, just put away the hard stuff. Like, man, just come chill with us at the bar, get drunk, hook up with some girls. That's, that's life. That's what you do in America. Like you work hard, party on the weekends, and that's it, right? Yeah. And so I tried that, but for me, that turned into like 2 weeks straight of just blacking out at the bar. Like, just, I was on work release towards the end of my stay at jail. I saved up a few $1,000s. That was all gone in 2 weeks, just drinking. And within a few months, I was back doing, drugs. So 2017, I ended up homeless. And at that point, I'd kind of lost a lot of hope. Like I kind of became numb to my life in the sense that I just didn't care anymore. Like I hated it. And I was begging God, because at this point I was going to church like out of desperation. I was going, with my wife now, but at the time it was a girl I was trying to hook up with, and that's the truth of it. I was trying to hook up with her, and I thought if I went to church with her, it would help my chances, And but what was interesting is God used that, because what started out that way, I started to go after the first few times. I started going because I actually wanted to, and I didn't know why. I wasn't really experiencing anything specific or anything that was like life altering, or nothing was happening. There was just something in my heart that made me feel like this weird, some type of peace was there on the days I would go, and then the Sunday like maybe I wouldn't go. I was like, you know what, I felt like just this 10% increase of peace on the Sundays I was going. It was hard to explain. And so I started going out of my own will, but also I'm calling out to God for over a year. I'm calling out to God, walking to go get drugs, begging him. Like, I thought, did people tell me you're real? Why aren't you showing up for me? Why aren't, like, what do I got to do to get in touch with you? Like, I'm having this dialogue with God within myself and out loud, and I'm trying to read the Bible. I don't have the attention span for that yet. But I'm like trying, and nothing was really working. But what was really interesting, and this is something I never shared in any of my other podcasts, was I remember when I was right when I became homeless. At this point, I had been out for like 11 months. And so if you have this 11-month period where I'm calling out to God, I don't know anything about church. Like, even the church I was going to was a Spanish church. So it was translated. So there's a lot of stuff I didn't catch probably. And I remember I was, I had this girlfriend at the time. We would like be in hotel rooms, doing whatever. And I started to feel like guilty about it, and I didn't know why. And it was really interesting because I had no language for Christianity. I had no, I knew like, oh, you're not supposed to sleep, with girls. You're not supposed to fornicate. I knew some of the rules, but I had no understanding of any of it. And so I remember one night, like we had, just finished doing whatever. And I told her, I said, you know what? I don't think I want to do this anymore. I said, I feel like I'm supposed to like wait till I'm married to have sex, and I remember she laughed and clowned me for it, kind of like, yeah, okay, shut up, and it was funny because I felt like, you ever seen those movies where it's like a kid kind of like gets picked on and laughs in front of his friends, but then turns around and he's sad. Like, that's how I felt. I turned around in bed and was like, no, like, I'm serious. Like, because I laughed and I was like, yeah, I know. But internally I was dead serious, and I was like, no, like, I really feel like this, and so it was weird because I didn't know that was conviction. That was the first time I ever got convicted in my life of like, and I always had a pretty strong conscience as far as, like I was never, no matter how bad my addiction got, I never turned into like one of those really grimy people that would just like rob my friends and steal. Like I always maintain a certain level of integrity. Anyway, so now I'm homeless, 2017. Basically, I don't want to get into every detail now, but basically a series of spiritual events started happening. I had an overdose where I basically was, when I woke up in the overdose, I was in another realm where I was like in this, it was a dreamlike state, but it was just extremely, realer than this reality, and I'm like, have demons on my left and my right, and I'm following one to this big gold door, and it tells me one more step, you're almost there. and then turned around and it was this ugly demon. And I was like, oh, hell no. And I woke up. And so all this stuff was happening all simultaneously. I have my girlfriend at the time's mom, like, telling me, like, spiritual warfare, and she's a Christian, telling me, like, you know, demons are after you. And then I'm starting to see this stuff happen. It was just very strange. I had some lady come up to me at work and say, God says you need to go see him. And I had stopped going to church for the last, you know, couple months at that point. And I was like, wow, I know I need to see him. Like, how do I meet with the guy? You know, like, I've been trying to, you know, and so all this stuff kind of started happening. And then I ended up overdosing. And so I overdosed like 2 days before Halloween 2017. And part of the overdose was that I had this prayer where I basically told God, what do you want from me? I knew I was going to overdose. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't a suicide attempt. I just knew that the amount I was doing was more than I should have been doing because I hadn't done it for like 3 months. I was doing other stuff, other drugs, and taking Suboxone for my addiction. And I was planning to go to a rehab. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to get one more high. And I remember I told God, I said, what do you want from me? Like, it was this very sobering moment, very honest moment, very intimate moment. I think it was probably the first time I really said like a genuine prayer almost, if that makes sense, you know, where I was just like, the Bible says that God doesn't regard an empty cry. He won't regard it. And so it was the first time I think my cry wasn't empty, that it wasn't selfish, you know, it was just genuine. And I said, God, what do you want from me? Like, this is all I know. You see my life. This is all I've done for the last 12 years. What else am I supposed to do? I went to the church. I said the little prayer they told me to pray. I did all the things. So where are you? You know? And I said the Our Father prayer, the only prayer I knew at the time, you know? And while I'm doing my shot, tying my arm off, and it's like this, almost like this ritualistic, like, high I'm doing, you know? And I said the prayer, and then I said, I'm sorry, forgive me. And I just did it. And then next thing I know, I'm waking up in an ambulance. So I go to the jail. It was probably the first time that I think all my life's choices hit me. The 18-month kind of was the tip of the iceberg, but this time was different. My mom was bawling on the phone. That was the only phone call I had, was her saying, you almost died again. This was like my 5th overdose. And the second one I was hospitalized for, or had to get an ambulance for. She's broken. You know, I had this girl, my daughter, I'm leaving again. And so it was the first time in my life, it was like I was sitting in this room by myself, and everything about my life, all its issues, all my choices, everything I screwed up was just like in a pile in that room with me. And it was the first time it was like I couldn't turn away from it. There was nothing I could tell myself. There was no excuse. It was just like, man, you ruined your life, Josh. You know, because I had 8 years over my head. So in my mind, I'm like, you're going to be here for like 5 years, man. Like, you're done, you know? And I was like, you ruined your life. You're 25 years old, and you're not going to get home till you're 30-something. Your daughter's going to be 10 years old probably by the time you get home. You're done. And that was kind of how I felt. And I remember I told God, I said, you know what? I don't know how real you are. I don't know how much you care about me. But I said, I just want to be a good boy. I'm not asking you to do nothing for me. I just want to be a decent human. Like, that's all I want. I just want to be good. That was my prayer. And I started going to this Mind Dorm, which was a Christian-based program. And so over the course of the next 2 months, I was in a program where they basically would have speakers come in, talk about the Bible. They would have like meditation time. You'd have to wake up at like 6:30 in the morning and do like an hour of silent time. You had to read the Bible or write. So it basically was an environment where they kind of pushed you into what it takes to connect with God in a sense, rather than just playing cards and watching movies. This program, they really need to have it all over the country, but it's only in my county that I know of that's like this. Being in that place, I just said, you know what do I got to lose? I started reading the Bible. I started praying, and I don't know there was no moment. You know, some people, you hear people have these encounters with God where it's like this moment happens. For me, it was over the course of maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, where I just slowly started to gain an interest and gain a hunger and sobriety for what was going on. And what was interesting was that, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of time. Like, I think the low end of my guidelines was 1.5 years. So that was like the least amount of time I was going to do. So I'm already planning to be there a while. I'm still withdrawing, so I'm going through withdrawals, but also I have like joy and peace, and I have like hope, and I didn't care. Like, it was very strange. Like, it was like counterproductive. It was like, you know, like I felt like bad that I didn't feel bad. I was like, well, whatever, I'm here. And I just started to get this joy. And then I'd say there was this one specific week, about three or 4 weeks in, where everything took hold of me and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Like there was one specific day where I was sitting with some other guys and they were making, dirty jokes or just clowning around really. And I went to say something that was very much like me to say, something that was within my sarcasm or within, I go to speak and I say what I wanted to say, and something in my heart pulled and it didn't feel like it was me. And like, I don't know how to explain it. I felt like I was trying to be somebody I wasn't. And I felt like that was stupid to say that. Like, what a dumb joke. And then I saw like the conversation. I was like, and I'm now Bible verses are coming to my head. You know what I mean? And it's like, avoid vain talk. It only leads to more ungodliness. And I'm like, so now I'm like in life, but I'm having these Bible verses I've been reading the last few weeks just start popping up in me. And I'd be in a situation and a verse would come to me that had to do with that situation. And now next thing I know, I actually don't want to go home and drink this time. Actually, I don't really want to have sex anymore with women. Like, like all these things are just changing in me just rapidly. Then I'm having people come up to me like, dude, this one guy came up to me. He's like, man, every time I'm having a bad day, he's like, if I just look at you, and I mean, this stuff was humbling me. Like, he's like, dude, if I look at you, he's like, I just get filled with joy. He's like, you're like glowing. People are coming up to me like, dude, what's happening? Like I had one guy literally say, dude, what happened to you? He said, you weren't like this a week ago. He said, what? And so I radically got changed. And then after that, it was once I clicked, like it clicked with all the pieces, I would pray and I would literally feel God's presence, like a tangible presence. And what was crazy is I actually started to have these encounters with God that reminded me of psychedelics. Like there was this joy, this laughter, this type of just richness of life that would flood through me when I was taking psychedelics. And then next thing I knew, I'm having those types of experiences through prayer, except it was clean. It was like, there's no come down with this. There's no anxiety. It was like, man, this is pure life. Like I felt like I was like hooked up to, like Captain America's machine or something, just like getting flooded with life, like that. And so that happened for pretty much the rest of the last month I was there. I get this bond. That was supernatural. That in itself was a miracle. So I get a bond to go to a halfway house. And so anyways, that basically was my transition into the Christian life. After that, it was like I turned my back, haven't touched a needle since, just been pressing into what God has in store for me,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. That's there's so many like kind of follow-up questions. So like I'm gonna rapid fire them at you if that's all right. Did you grow up outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania?
No. My dad's from Pennsylvania. He's from Erie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because my hat.
Just in general, because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and the way you grew up, I never got into hard drugs, but it was a culture that was very much about like the party culture. I was really into drinking. I started binge drinking when I was about 16, and it was pretty bad. I mean, from like 17 through my early 20s, really. I mean, it was like I would black out every Friday and Saturday night. Like there are whole gaps. And I talked to like doctors and stuff like, have you ever drank till blackout? I was like, yeah. Like how many times? I was like, maybe 500, maybe more. Like it's a lot. And like there was a developing brain. It's all before I was 25. When you say that you were like raised in a good household and stuff like that, I talked to a lot of parents, and a lot of parents are like, well, we did a good job because our kid's not a drug addict or something like that. It's like, hold on, that's not a great metric. There's a lot of reasons why people fall into drug abuse and stuff like that. You talked about being, and it's very, vulnerable of you to share, but like the fact that you were sexually abused, I mean, that had to have played a role. The ripple effects of that, of like child abuse, are so undeniable. They're so powerful in how they just, ruin innocence, and then how you just are always trying to somehow make sense of that or repress it or whatever it is through drugs. And that can happen to anybody. I mean, it just can. These predators are out there and stuff like that. But I just wanted to kind of just touch on that idea that being a drug addict can happen essentially to anyone.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and it's funny because a lot of times people have addictions that they just don't have to acknowledge because they're living functioning. I know people that were like definitely addicted to stuff, but they just had good jobs and never got in trouble with the law. Yeah. So it's like no one ever had to confront them with it, but they're just living with this thing. I'm a parent. I have a 12-year-old daughter now that I'm like trying to raise right. And the one thing I'm realizing is I'm like, dude, it really has nothing to do. Like there's people that are, devout Christians or just good people, they raise, and they basically raise their kids right, but their kids still go off the wrong way. That's what happens is you can't find identity. Like when kids get to a certain age, they become their own person no matter how you raise them. It's kind of a flip of a coin in some ways, but I do think how you try to raise them, obviously it matters, but in some cases it's out of your hands. But I think for me, I think the abuse definitely had something to do with it. And I've still thought about, I think it might have started just with curiosity for me. It obviously had nothing to do with how I was raised, in the sense that it wasn't like I didn't have a bad upbringing, but I think that really just played a role on my self-esteem. You know what I mean? I think getting molested, that's really what it was, because it started as a self-esteem thing, as a confidence thing, as a feeling bad about letting it happen, kind of, because even though I was like 8 or 9, even though I was only 8 or 9, there was still this sense, as once I hit started having preteen, teenage years, if you were a man, you would have stopped that. How could you let another man, even though I wasn't a man, I'm thinking like, how could you call yourself a man? So, yeah.
Don't want to touch on the curiosity thing, because I think that's huge. But before, like, when you talk about people get addicted, it was a frustration point in the podcast you did with the conservative political pundit Michael Knowles. Is I pulled it out. He was saying stuff about drug. He said, "I'm not a drug person. I like booze and I like tobacco." And your response is kind of like, well, it's a personal preference. But like, I had to like pull that out and help people understand. I think there's a chance for me to kind of address this on my podcast.
Yeah.
It's like, caffeine is a drug. Yeah. Tobacco is a drug, and alcohol is a drug. Alcohol is an extremely destructive drug. I mean, just when you look at what it does to your brain, what it does to your body, it's not good for you. And when Michael Knowles says, like, we look at meth and we say that's terrible, but then we look at psilocybin mushrooms and I say, like, you're still poisoning yourself. The science behind something like psilocybin is not the same. The pharmacological differences in drugs, I do think matters. It's a weird thing that we say, like, drugs are bad. Like, here's an example, Josh. Like, if I would go into my school and I go up to my principal and my principal goes, "Hey, what'd you do this weekend?" Well, I go, "You know what? I got a bottle of tequila and I just got hammered." He'd be like, "Oh, nice, high five." But if I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I got some psilocybin mushrooms and did some psilocybin," or I smoked cannabis or something like that, then it would be like, "Whoa, what are you doing drugs for?" One is objectively worse for your body than others. I'm not endorsing drug use. What I'm saying here is, like, we have this weird mixed up thing. I asked people at Starbucks and I said, if my 6-year-old went in here and ordered a triple espresso, would you give it to him? They're like, "Yeah." I'm a big fan of Dr. Carl Hart, who's a pharmacopsychologist at Columbia University, and he tests drugs on people and stuff. And he has talked about, if it's pure cocaine and it's dosed out properly, that it essentially works as just like a stimulant. But if I gave pure cocaine to my 6-year-old, a small bump of cocaine for my 6-year-old, I would be locked up in prison. But my kid can go get a triple espresso. And I think that the way it affects the brain would actually be very similar. Again, I'm not talking about giving drugs. Right. I'm just talking about the way that we in society kind of categorize drugs is something that I'm trying to just get more education on. I think drugs are drugs, and then we just accept certain things. So it's fine to get hammered, but it's not okay to do these other chemicals, even things that naturally occur in a natural form and stuff.
I agree, because I agree it's not a topic I like, but, because my sister and my mom, they both have their medical cards, right? And my sister, her view on it, this is no different than alcohol. People have barbecues and openly drink. In her mind, I have a medical card. I should be able to just openly smoke. And she does. And for that reason, I'm like, I love my sister. I like going over there. But then I'm like, dude, I don't want to be rolling over here with my 12-year-old smelling weed throughout your house and seeing bowls and weed out on the counter. Like, You know what I'm saying? It's like, but I understand her perspective, because weed has become so extremely socially accepted. I can understand that viewpoint. But for me, my viewpoint is, it's like, I don't agree with that. You know what I mean? It's interesting because alcohol is literally the most dangerous drug. Like, that's the one thing where you can die from the withdrawals through alcohol. My uncle just died last summer.
Oh my God. You can die from stopping taking it. And that's not the same with the cannabis. You can't.
Right.
There's other dangers to it, for sure. It's just something that I think that we've just kind of, society's just in a society trap where we just kind of accept that that's the way that it is. One of the things that you shared before in other podcasts and elsewhere is that you had a mushroom trip. After you become Christian, you had a mushroom experience, a psilocybin experience. It was essentially a bad trip. And in that, you experienced meeting Jesus. And he kind of said something along the lines of, like, let's not do this again. I believe that happened to you. And now we're getting to the psychedelic realm, which I am very interested in. I just got back from the conference and stuff like that. Is this real? Is it a hallucination? That's a tricky thing. Even like Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins is kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, because it's, in some ways, it's kind of like your testimony experience is like, it's realer than this sometimes. Some psychedelic experiences feel more real than it's almost like wax paper is taken off of the world and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing things I wouldn't normally see. Are they really there or not? that's a whole different thing. But my question is, how much of that experience, let's just say it's real because it was real in that it had a real effect on you, of Jesus saying, let's not do this again, is because you are a drug addict, Josh. Like, you have an addictive history. You have this thing where you said, like, I go to the bar and then 2 weeks later I'm on heroin. That's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people can just sit back and have 2 beers at the barbecue and they don't end up naked in the back of a cop car. Like, some people can, smoke pot and then they cannot smoke pot. Some people can take these drugs. Some people can even do heroin recreationally and not get addicted. There are, I don't recommend it, but you have that addictive gear in you. And I wonder if when Jesus says, let's not do this again, was that a very specific message? This is a question I wanted to ask you. It's one of the reasons I reached out to you. Do you feel like that was a specific statement, a personalized relationship with you and Jesus for him? Like, this is not for you. These chemicals are, you not say can't handle them, but this is not something that's going to be good for you specifically. Is that kind of the way it felt when you had that experience?
Yeah, I think when he said that, it definitely was personal. It definitely was intimate. It was definitely between him and I. And I definitely think that what you're saying was incorporated within that, because obviously, there's a lot said that's unsaid. When God speaks, there's a lot that's unsaid that's right. And
feel it. Yeah.
That comes with the whole, it's a word, but it comes with the whole paragraph. And
that's a great way to put it.
And so, yes, I do think it was personal. But then I also think about, to the part where the demon said he came and ate off our table. And so that is, and here's the thing, that has been the conversation, that has been the thought that has kind of plagued me about that whole experience. I would be lying if I said that there was not a part of me that wanted to do mushrooms again, to be like, man, maybe if I did it like this, like I've rattled my brain with, like, could it have been this? Could it have been that? What if, because it's becoming so scientifically backed, and because it's been used within medicine more and more, and it's increasing, they have actual results. I can't deny that. I can't sit here and be like, oh no, it didn't help your anxiety. No, it didn't. It used to help mine. I can't tell people that. It was an extremely beneficial thing for me for years. I can't sit there and deny it. However, I guess my view on it, and this kind of goes into microdosing and all that, is it's hard to just black and white it. It's really hard. Yeah. However, I guess my view is, like, I know for me, I don't see the point of needing it for anything. And then for others, I see, and I have to be so careful about this because I'm not trying to condone it. I think it's extremely dangerous. And I'll give you an example, actually. Here's why I think it's dangerous. I know multiple people, but I'll give you the most recent one. I did a prayer service a few months ago. This girl drove from like 2 hours away. And I didn't know her, but she's there praying, and it was a 5-hour prayer service. And so she stayed, through the whole thing. And I felt, I'm like, man, you stayed for a while. Let me come talk to you. So I wanted to get to know her and make her drive worth it, and really, spend some time with her and just, talking to her. So me and my pastor friend were talking to her, and I'm asking, because the whole night I'm praying, and God kept having me go and pray about mental health. And I'd like pray about it. And then an hour later during the prayer, I'd be back on mental health. And I'm like, why does God keep pulling me to mental health? And I talked to her, what's going on with your mental health? And it turns out that basically she was like a yoga instructor. She was in that whole kind of movement of psilocybin and this and that. And basically what happened is I forget the teacher, but she was following a certain teacher. She started out doing MDMA with her boyfriend therapeutically. Started out good. And then she transitioned into taking acid spiritually and all that kind of stuff. And what happened was she had a trip, and she basically lost her mind. She was almost permanently put into a hospital. It destroyed her life. She completely lost her mind for 2 years, she said. She just now is starting to rehabilitate to the point where she can just function. But for 2 years, she completely lost her mind and was in a psychotic break and psychosis and all. She didn't share every detail, but she was almost committed permanently, like very close to it, and was committed for a period of time and messed up her relationship with her kids. So my question and my stance on it is, because of this, why is there so much risk involved and danger involved, is I think something that we have to look into, because I don't have to worry about someone drinking water and having, it backfiring on them or something. You know what I mean? Like, There's a lot of risk involved with it, and people don't talk about the people that lose their mind, and that's something that I don't know. Why is there so much danger there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it seems like I've been doing so much research on this because I'm really curious, and that's something that came up that I do want to touch on. Like it seems like the people that are excluded from a lot of the trials are people that have like psychosis or some form of it, paranoid schizophrenia, something like that in their family history, because it can start an early onset of it. So it can trigger these things that are kind of latent in certain people's genetics, and it can trigger that to come out. Now, whether or not that would have come out regardless, they don't know. Sometimes it comes out in like a big car crash or something, but you have just like a monumental event, it can cause it. So that's like those people, there's a lot of paperwork you do when you do like the Johns Hopkins and University of California, San Francisco tests and stuff like that on these psychedelics. Is like, you got to make sure that your brain is essentially doesn't have any of those little triggers. And those big experiences can cause those triggers. The 12-step program, I listened to a conversation between economist Glenn Loury and Jordan Peterson, I think. And Glenn Loury was an addict, and he got sober through the 12-step program. And one big part of this 12-step program is acknowledging that there's a higher power, you know, and that like the belief in God is a part of that. And that is the most standardized and successful way to get people off of their addictions. But psychedelics are proving to also be a major way to get people off of things like heroin, because Robin Carhart Harris talks about it. Kind of breaks up call it the default mode network, which is like these routines. Like, you know, you're an addict. So a lot of it's like the routine. It's tying off. It's scoring. It's like, you get these little dopamine hits. It's not just shooting it up. It's a process. You become, I used to smoke cigarettes in high school, and it was like in the morning on the way to school, I'd let up a butt. At lunch, we'd go up and smoke them on the way. And it's just like, it's not even the cigarette, it's the process. And you just get into these ruts. Like you get off a ski slope, and there's those places you put your skis right off the lift, and you just kind of go down. And what psychedelics can do is kind of give you a fresh coat of powder to allow you to go in and out, and it frees you up from some of those ruts. So it's interesting to me, making this connection, is how psychedelics seem to be a way to get people off of addiction, which is extremely difficult, and faith in God seems to be. So that makes some sort of link, whether they're just powerful experiences or whatever. I don't promote psychedelic use. I definitely don't promote, like hard stimulant uses, methamphetamine and stuff like that, cocaine or opiate uses. That stuff scares me, fentanyl, pills, all that kind of stuff. But I do think they should be studied.
And I'm with you, and I think they should be studied, and I'm not unbiased. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely acknowledge, and I think a lot of Christians don't like that, because I'm the same way with my faith. I was just talking to people about, near-death experiences, and I said, dude, watch some near-death experiences and tell me it's not hard. They have challenged my faith crazily, because I believe them 100%. The way they described it is the way that I experienced it on my mushroom experience, the way I experienced God, everything about it, the way the spirit works. I know that this spirit realm that people experience on hallucinogens is real. And I just saw it on, like a Joe Rogan clip where he said they did this study where basically they were inducing people into DMT trips for longer periods of time, and they were all experiencing the same place and same type of creatures or whatever. That's something that, like, how do you explain that? You know what I mean? And that's what I was, I was telling someone, because he was asking me, this was like 2 days ago, he was in my DMs, asked me, how do you know it wasn't the drugs? And I said, I can't prove anything. All I can tell you is that anybody that takes psychedelics, what's a hallucination from the drug, and this is something else. Like when I was tripping, like, oh, the wall's melting right now and it's different colors. That's the drug. Oh, I'm puking right now and it looks like rainbows. That's the drug. Like, okay, I'm hallucinating. But when you're like injected into another reality, and you know what I mean, it goes beyond that.
Well, it's replicatable, it's repeatable. That's a big thing with science. It's one of the things what makes social science, like psychology and stuff, very difficult. Is it's kind of, human beings are so diverse that it's really hard to get the same reaction out of people. But that experience, I know the clip you're talking about, and that's something that's big in that space, is like, if you take DMT, you will go there, I will go there, that person over there will go there. So what is there? And if you say like it's just the drugs, well, what is it? If it is replicatable and repeatable over and over and over again, then that's almost like part of the definition of scientific truth, is if you add this stimuli, this result happens. What do we do with that is really, really tricky. One of the things, Josh, that you talk about is curiosity. I am an extremely curious person. And that's what led me to have this podcast. I think it's what got me into education and stuff like that, is I'm a searcher. I really am. And you have that in you as well. And I think I was always curious about drugs. I was scared of them, so I stayed away from hard drugs pretty much my whole life. But I was always very curious. And you were very curious. And when I was at this conference, the psychedelic conference, it was a lot of people that were searchers. They're searching for truth. And, when you can have these chemicals and go to another place and see angles that you don't normally see, even on cannabis, like It's why you smoke weed and then watch The Matrix, because you get like, you get like other angles to it. Like, oh, this is interesting. This is deeper truth. I think that, for searchers, there's so many avenues to take. And that's also what the same thing that got me into like the interest in psychedelics, the interest in drugs, and the interest in politics and all that kind of stuff. Like, how could someone support that politician? Like, I was actually, instead of just being, a rhetorical question, it was an actual question. Like, please help me understand how you can have these viewpoints. But that's also what led me personally to a life of faith. I was like, this seems like nonsense. Virgin birth, whatever. This seems like nonsense. And I didn't buy into it. I was kind of raised like you. Like, we went to church for an hour and then we didn't really talk about it. In my like just curious nature, I started to ask a lot of questions. And then I had a psychedelic experience. And part of what that is it disrupted my idea of what is real and what is not. And then it humbled me in a severe way, Josh. It was like, who am I to say what's possible or not?
Yeah.
And you had an experience too, where you mentioned where you were like, well, no one's died from cannabis or mushrooms or whatever. And then God said like, I can kill you at any moment. Like, you do realize that you haven't got this whole thing figured out. And I had a very similar experience where my world was turned upside down, and I realized it humbled me into like my scientist, social science, like nerdy professor type of brain of like, you don't know anything. Humble yourself, young man. Like, you don't know. And that is what really prompted me to go, I'm open-minded now to the realities that would be in the book, in the Bible, is like, I don't know. So that's why I'm interested in the link of, and this is a weird thing, this is mixing worlds, and I think you might have some criticisms that are very valid, and I want to hear them. If these experiences helped get me to a life of faith, and I'm not pushing this like real hard on all my listeners, but essentially the day that I got baptized in August on my 40th birthday, and since I got baptized I dunked myself in water. No one's rolled their eyes harder at being a born-again Christian than me before this time, I assure you.
Yeah.
But my life has gotten objectively, quantifiably better in every way. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm kinder. I'm more wise. I treat people better on the street. I have less anxiety about the world. It's just better in every way.
Yeah.
And psychedelics helped get me there because it opened my closed mind.
Yeah.
And I am curious if for searchers, is that something that is a way to get people to faith? Is it this way of just like rounding your edges on what you know and humbling people, because those can be very humbling experiences? And again, neither of us are trying to promote the use of this,
right.
But man, that's something that I was really curious on your thoughts, because that's a weird mix of worlds that the Christian world is not the psychedelic world. And the psychedelic world, I was just there, is very kind of anti-religion.
Yeah.
So open. And the religious world is so kind of like structured. So there's not a lot of overlap on that Venn diagram. So I was just curious on your thoughts on that. I know it was a bit of a rant, but
no, but those are like some of my favorite talking points, to be honest with you. I'm going to try to put it in a smaller, summarized version. But one of the first things I'll say is that one of the biggest things that pushed me from Christianity before was it seemed so corny and so superficial, and just like we just don't do these things, and then we stand in church on Sunday and just sing a song to somebody we can't see, and then we go about our day and judge people, basically. That was my view. And one of the things that started that was in my neighborhood, there was a Christian family. They homeschooled their kids. It was like that Christian family, right? And the kids would always tell and tattle to, and I was like, these kids suck. Christians suck. Like that was like my introduction, right? And I was like, man, these kids are babies. Leave us alone. All the other kids getting in trouble. But so there was this disconnect from it, seeing it as a spiritual thing. So when I got into Buddhism and psychedelics, it was like, yo, this is real. Like you said, you could take any person and give them a dose of DMT and they will have this encounter. I can't guarantee that taking someone to church, because that is something that God works within your heart. It's like, there's so many factors there, honestly. Like, people don't like hearing that. That's the truth. I've taken plenty of people that went to church and nothing happened for them, and they went back to drugs, giving people drugs, and they definitely got high, and they definitely had an experience, whether good or bad. Once I found Jesus, and he showed me that it was actual spiritual truth and actual power behind all this, like real things. When I started seeing videos like people would pray and get healed, and I started seeing, I'm like, what? There actually is like, there's something here. Like, there's actually a power behind this. There's actually a weight behind this. That kind of is what intrigued me. And then I started to see all the ways that our Christian spirituality actually lined up with the spiritual reality just as much, if not more, as what I previously thought. And so once I started to see it as more of a spiritual thing, as like kingdom reality, is when the power hit of this isn't just rules. These are a structure. This is a structure map of how we function at our highest capacity, by fasting, by avoiding porn. Like, dude, these are things that will build your spirit. This world is crushing people's spirits with porn and dopamine hits and scrolling on phones. God is pulling us out of that so we could function at our full capacity in his spirit. And so once I started seeing that, I was like, yo, this is really cool, actually. This is really not what I thought at all. I had it all wrong. Once you read the Bible for yourself, once you connect to God for yourself, it's and have that real, like, he leads you, it's a way different thing than you'll ever find at church. I'm not against church, but it's just, I think religion ruins it for so many people. I mean, so many people I met, like, I mean, I can't tell you hundreds of people that I've met, like, yeah, well, I was raised in Catholic school. And they have nothing to do with it because they were fed this, do this, don't do that. Hey, you can't listen to that. Hey, like, it just kills it for you. Like, because you don't have the revelation of love behind why you're doing what you're doing. It's like your wife just comes home and is like, hey, I don't want you sitting there and you don't know why. Hey, I don't want you watching that show. And you know, it's just like, yeah. So back to the original question, I just wanted to throw that out there, is that, and this is where we have to be careful, or at least I have to be careful in how I say this, is God uses psychedelic experiences because it allows your heart to receive what he always wants to tell you more than any other time. So it breaks down the barriers of your pride, of your misconceptions. It breaks all that down. And so
ego destruction is a big thing that they say. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's what it is because, like you were talking about, that's why I was laughing with that humbling on the psychedelics, is like, I always say, I'm like, man, everybody needs to experience that. And here's the thing, I'm not saying that you need to experience it necessarily on psychedelics, because I've had it through the presence of God. I've had times where God has humbled me the same exact way, and it's more raw. But man, there is nothing more sobering than when the entire universe and God and everything lets you know you're just a piece of dust, and you're just in a little fetal position knowing I am nothing. I'm just this little grain in this grand, universe. There's nothing better than that, more freeing. But I know that humbling you're talking about, it's like, breaks you. It's crazy, but it's needed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's why, because it's just people are more receptible. It's easier for God to reach you in a sense, but that's where it gets tricky, because people say, well, he met me here. Why is it like, so that means this is okay. And I always say, like, God uses a lot of things. Doesn't mean that he leaves you there or wants you to stay. And so that's my stance on it, is like, he'll definitely use those drugs because they put you in that position to receive what he's always, we're too dense in this realm. We're too filled up with ourself. You can only encounter the love of God when you come to the end of yourself,
Yeah. I was really sick in my early 20s. And that also was like something that opened my mind. So there's a lot of negative experiences that can lead you to something positive. But right. Yeah, when you say, like, porn or the things that, like, they look down on in this world, the reality is that the Bible seems like a blueprint, and it's like here's a guide on how to do life right. When what's interesting is, like, scientists are talking about the dangers of, certain things in your brain, like, the dangers of pornography or fasting is good. This stuff is in the Bible. They told you to wash their hands. The Old Testament, Leviticus is like, wash your hands before eating. That was before germ theory. So there's some deep wisdom in this. It's a funny thing that I experienced. I didn't drink coffee until I was about 30 years old. Wow. And then I started drinking coffee, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I reached out to some of my friends, like high school buddies, and I was like, guys, you know what? If you're having like a slow morning, you know what really gets you going? A warm cup of Joe. And they're like, what, are you an idiot? Like, everyone knows that. You're just discovering now that coffee is good in the morning. I was like, and then when I started reading the Bible, Josh, it was the same thing. I was like, wow, this book has wisdom. Like, the Holy Bible has wisdom in it. I was reading like Proverbs. They're like, yeah, no shit. Like, but that's the thing is, like, I was explaining, I want to get an expert on the show on placebo effect, because I read this study about people who had severe anxiety, and they took 100 people with severe anxiety who were on, like, anxiety medication. They told them, they said, 50 of you are going to get a sugar pill starting tomorrow. So 50 are going to get a placebo. And all 100 had their anxiety come back. So the mind is more powerful than the drugs in sometimes. And I was explaining this to my friend who's a pastor, and he said, what we call that? He said, that's faith. And if you deeply believe something, then it can have real, quantifiable, measurable effects on your brain and body. And, if you look at the stories of Jesus and stuff like that, who did he heal? The people with strong faith, the people that had faith. I mean, it can be even just like real faith the size of a mustard seed is what they say, but like real faith can change you. But that even also has a scientific explanation in what we would call the placebo effect or something like that. Andrew Huberman was at this conference and he was talking about, he's like, I think the experiences you have on psychedelics are achievable with a sober mind. He's like, but it's just toned down. No, you know, I've called like psychedelic drugs or even like cannabis, like weed or whatever, like an enhancer. Like if you're hungry, you're going to be really hungry. You know, if you're scared, you might be really scared, you know, but he called him an amplifier. Like you can have these experiences, just kind of amplifies them. So I'm really interested in the way that there's scientific explanations now for things that have been written down for thousands of years in the Bible. And that just more goes back and supports what I keep believing, which is that the Bible has real truth about understanding this world.
This one guy, I'll give you two quick little cool things I found out. There was, for one, whenever Abraham, whenever they're doing the circumcision, they were doing it on the 8th day, right? That was what the Bible was teaching, to do it on the 8th day. And then you find out that science says that the 8th day of a child's life is the best possible day to do it, because something with the blood coagulates in a certain way that it only does on that day. Wow. How they know to do it on the 8th day is the best day to do a circumcision. And then you got this one guy basically using Genesis, figured out that there was 10 dimensions. I think some people argue there's 11 dimensions on Earth. He found out there's 10 dimensions just reading Genesis. And this guy is saying like science spent like millions of dollars to figure this out over years and years through science. But this guy figured it out just reading Genesis. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it's like, you see stuff like that and you're like, dude, this is not coincidence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. People are like, well, maybe it was just trial and error. It's like, well, hold on. There were millions of people around the planet and different tribes all over the place. Why is it this tribe? Why is this the Israelite? You know, the Jews. Like, why was it the Israelites who figured out all of this stuff that seems to be true? Like, you could just say it was just trial and error, or they just got lucky or whatever. Or you could go, I mean, is that really more reasonable of an explanation than the idea that the creator who designed this computer program or whatever we're in, the coder, said, here is how to get through this. Here's like kind of the source key for how to get through this life once you have free will and you have consciousness. Here's a guide. You can make decisions now, human beings. You can decide right from wrong. You ate from the tree of knowledge, you know? I mean, was that just some sort of early primate that all of a sudden looked in like a pond and goes, oh my gosh, I'm alive? Like, was that Adam? You know, like, I mean, I think that there's these elements of understanding reality, and it coincides. So is it more reasonable to say like, well, they just figured out germ theory and they just figured out that masturbation was wrong and fasting is good and all that kind of stuff that we're just figuring out now with science? Or is it reasonable to say like the creator came down and said like, all right, I'm going to give you free will, but here's a guide? Like, how much more crazy is that? It doesn't seem more crazy to me. Again, I'm biased probably like you are, you know?
Yeah.
The last question I have for you, but what would you say are the secular practical benefits of a life of faith, especially like for you specifically in like the teachings of Jesus? How does that, undeniably, it made your life better in these kinds of quantifiable ways? Not just like, it makes me feel good, but like, in what ways has it been a benefit to you? I think that's really beneficial. And like, what's your practice like as far as like how to know, you know, the teachings of Jesus? Like, do you read the Bible? Like, how do you talk with Christian friends and stuff like that? That's kind of my last question.
That's a really good question. I appreciate that. Man, I think the first thing it did for me, and like you talked about with sobriety, is God is a big factor. And step 3 talks about believing in a God. For me, that was the whole thing. I had been sober before. I had 18 months clean. I had times of, 6 months, 3 months. And the one thing that never left was I always was fighting it. Like, it was always in the back of my head, like, go get high, go get high, go get high. And like, no matter what I did, that part never left. So it was when I found Jesus that it seemed like that part just completely disappeared. It was like, oh, now I'm just done. Oh, wow. Like, there's, it was very strange. I literally just got delivered. It was crazy. I never experienced that. But for me, the most practical and I guess obvious ways that I've noticed it is the biggest thing was purpose. I finally, for the first time in my life, felt like I had a purpose. I felt like I'm not just being nice to somebody because I'm a nice guy anymore. I felt like I was, not that I was performing, but I felt like, man, this stuff matters. Like, there's somebody that is witnessing my life that cares about this stuff. You know what I mean? Me helping somebody, it has nothing to do with me. Me taking the high road when, like, man, my favorite thing is integrity. Like, when no one is going to see what you're doing and you do something that someone else even might get the credit for it, or, you know, I mean, you look bad, but you did the right, that kind of stuff is what I believe God really gets excited about. And so it gave me a purpose in the mundane. That's the biggest thing. In the mundane little stuff, it gave me a huge purpose of things that I think actually matter. The next thing is it gave me a lot of comfort, hope, and just knowing like there's something that actually cares about me that's bigger than this world. And I've seen it play out, man. Like once you believe, that's the thing about faith, is once you believe it, then you start, it's just like God just opens up this whole new world to you. And it's like, you know, at last, a whole new world. It's like, that's how I felt. I mean, it was like, wow, this was here this whole time. What made me miss it? It was really very strange. And so I'd say those are like the biggest things. And then for me, what it looks like to connect to God is, you know, it started with the Bible. Just read, like, it's interesting. I notice most people go through this where it's like that when you first kind of believe, there's this grace period where God just like supernaturally gives you strength to read the Bible, it seems like. Maybe not for everyone, but I've noticed it's a common thing. And I know it was like that with me, where the first year, it was like I was reading the Bible like 2, 3, 4 hours a day, every day. I couldn't stop. It was just like every day, Bible. And so it's like, but that's God's way of like just filling you with his word, you know, filling you with his ways. And so it starts off just that, because I have conversations with the Bible. You know, that's my favorite way to read it now, is slowly. I used to try to just read as many chapters as I could and just ingest it. But now I really like to sit with it, and like, I might take one chapter and I'll read it over the whole day. You know, I'll read it in the morning and just kind of think about it. Maybe I'll read it in another translation and then kind of, you know, I'll pray about it. I'll pray on it. I'll ask questions. I like to just really like soak in what I'm reading, because if you believe that, like you said, faith, I mean, faith is power. That's what Bible says is the only thing that pleases God, actually, is faith. And so that's very powerful, because I think it's like, man, when you read some of this stuff, if you start saying like, no, I'm not praying for this, I'm not asking for it, I already believe that I have it. Like if you read, for example, Ephesians 2, and you read those, you know, Ephesians 1 and 2, it talks about identity, who you are. We're seated in heavenly places, all these things on identity. If you just start saying, God, thank you that this is who I am. God, thank you that, you know what I mean? It's crazy how powerful that is. And this was the last thing I'll say. I remember this one day, I basically had I was riding my bike to work in a snowstorm, and I had just gotten saved, you know, just got out of jail. And it was just hard. There was just like so many barriers and trials in that time. And it felt like, you know, the whole world was trying to push me back to my past. And it was just me and God like trucking through, you know, it felt like that. And so I remember this one specific morning, I had to ride my bike, and it was like 4 miles in the snow through the mountains in Maryland. And I was like, man, it sucks. It's like, you know, early in the morning, 3, 4 in the morning. And I was like, man, I don't want to do this. And I was so mad, but I began to just be sarcastic. And I said, you know what, God, and I'm saying this angrily, but I'm being genuine. And I'm like, God, I thank you. I have so much joy right now. This is so amazing. You know, I'm being complete. I'm like, yeah, this is amazing, Lord. And I was like, I'm so happy. I can barely breathe. You know, like I'm about to ride my bike in the snow, and I'm blessed. I'm joking. But next thing I knew, I was 5 minutes later, I'm literally walking out the door with a smile on my face, and I'm seeing this thing as a blessing. And I'm like, you know what? Thanks, God. I know you're working something in me in this. This is amazing. That was the biggest thing, is it flipped everything to where now I can look at any situation and see life in it. And that's the biggest thing, is so now when things that aren't good that are happening, I can see how they can produce something good. And so I think that's what it is it's like when you look at trauma, pain, trials, that's why it says count it all joy. They are landing pads for God's glory. Like anything that comes at your life to crush you is an opportunity, and you either handle it well or you handle it poor. You bypass the blessing, or you sit with it and find the life in it, and something will spring forth from that place. That's ultimately what faith has done for me the most, is that I'm just a normal guy just living life. You know, I'm just an everyday dude. But it turned my life supernatural to where now I'm not just going to the grocery store. Now I feel like there's an assignment. Now I feel like I'm there for a reason. Someone might want to kill themselves at that store, and I bump into them. And now they just wanted a hug or something. Like that stuff is really powerful to me. And I think that's what life is about. You know, we live in this social media age. Everyone is like trying to blow up on social media, do this. And don't get me wrong, I want to, you know, I'd love to get my YouTube page popping and, you know what I mean, get some, you know, social media money or influence or whatever. But because of that, so many people have been pulled out of reality. It's like everything has to be recorded, everything has to be documented. It's like there's a reason that these ancient desert fathers had these supernatural lives and encounters and mystical experiences and mystical lives, because they were in the moment and because they were living life. And so I think that has been the biggest blessing and obstacle that we are facing, is because we have so much technology. People don't know how to be still anymore. The Bible says, wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. We don't know how to just do that. And so that's really where I'm always like juggling, trying to get back to that place, because I know in that place where I just push the world away and just be alone with God, just be in my life, man, it's a powerful place. So I went on a little ramble, but
I mean, kids are riddled with ADHD. They're all medicated. I mean, you talked about identity. I've had people, this is the most diverse podcast you have listened to. Like, I've had so many different kinds of people on this podcast. And I found that the way you identify really matters. Like, do you align it with your race? Do you align it with your, how do you align your identity matters? Positive self-talk, again, there's data on that, like Tony Robbins stuff. But when you say purpose, that's Friedrich Nietzsche, the great philosopher. It's Viktor Frankl's man's search for meaning. He got through the Holocaust because he had purpose, he had meaning. And I think that there's a crisis right now. It's undeniable. The data's in on people feeling hopeless. And if you say that this gives you purpose is the antidote to hopelessness. Purpose. It's like, I don't have a point. If I'm here or I'm not here, it doesn't matter. That's going to lead to depression. That's going to lead to anxiety. And we are in a depression, anxiety crisis right now in this country. So if you say that this gives you a real purpose, I understand that. I get it. And I think a lot of people get it who have followed a path into some form of faith, is it does give you purpose. The Bible, that kind of like literature gives you an assignment, like you said. You can't die. I can't die. I got stuff I need to do. So it's going to be an antidote to the hopelessness that I think a lot of young people have. And I think that's a really, really important thing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So Josh, where can people find your YouTube page and get in contact with you or support what you're doing and all of that kind of stuff? Can you just like drop your plugs and we'll put them in the bottom of the YouTube video and things like that, so people can get in touch with you or support what you're doing and things along those lines?
Yeah, you can follow me. I have mainly TikTok and Instagram. It's a Joshua_Kingdom Priest. And then I have a YouTube page, which is just my full name, Joshua Zatkoff, Zatkoff. And you can locate me there and see what's going on.
Really appreciate that. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, man. It was nice to connect with you. And I think linking these worlds is a really important thing at this moment. We're in the summer of 2023, and there is a real crisis going on of purpose and meaning, and people are searching for some sort of antidote to that. And I think we were able to touch on a bunch of avenues that people can maybe look into or try. But as long as you're intentional, I think that if you're searching and you continue the search, I think you're going to find something positive. You just have to be ready to take some bumps along the way.
For sure.
I really appreciate talking to you, Josh. Really wish you well, and thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me, and I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. All right.
I do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
What's going on, Cylinder Radio listeners? If you're interested in the nuance of dialogue and things like that, check out my freebie, download Debate to Dialogue: How to Have Productive Conversations About Politics and Religion.